Now we are.
Thank you. Okay, so everybody, welcome to today's data track of the Campus Research Computing Consortium. I'm Amy Koshoff. I'm at the University of Cincinnati, and I'm joined by our other track facilitators, Deb McAfee, who is now at Arizona State. Is that right?
Yep.
And Sean, who's the University of Hawaii, and Venice, who is at University of Montana, if I believe, and please correct me if I've got those wrong. Today, we're going to have a presentation from some colleagues who are working to provide NIH guidance, but there are a lot of other things going on in the CARC world. As you can see, we're divided into several tracks. So you can attend data facing, researcher facing. We often partner with these other tracks to present information. Like last month was the Harvard Data Commons, which was a joint effort between data facing and researcher facing. If you're interested in getting involved, we welcome people to serve on our steering committees. So luckily this year we do have the extra colleagues joining us, but your input keeps our content fresh and interesting. There are also working groups and interest groups that you can participate in. So you can just reach out to us if you have any questions and we can direct you to the right places. Also, all of the content we are trying to document and record. So the notes from today will become a public document, and all of the recordings from our sessions go up on the YouTube channel. So you can go back and watch other presentations that have happened. So today we're joined by Lena Bowman and Danny Laprise, who are from Hofstra University, Northwell Health, and University of Louisville, respectively. And they are going to give a presentation on the NIH working group and the content that's been produced from this working group. This is a grassroots collection of librarians and information professionals who have been responding to the call for need for like more guidance on around the NIH data sharing and management policy that was released in January. So they're going to be talking about the effort to give the guidance and the outputs that have come from it. And I'm going to turn it over to you guys.
Hello, sorry, I was having some audio issues there earlier. Let me go ahead and share my screen again. Maybe. Sorry. Okay. All right. So hi, I am Danny Laprise. I am from the University of Louisville, and I'm joined by my colleague, Lena Bowman, and she is from the Zucker School of Medicine at Hofstra University and Northwell Health. And today we are going to be presenting on the products of a working group that we've been a part of that came together to prepare the materials for researchers and librarians ahead of the 2023 NIH DMS policy that came out. Lena, I think if she hasn't done it already, she's going to drop a link in the chat to the documents that are on OSF, so you can look over everything as we're going through them. And we have plenty of time at the end for questions, so make sure you jot them down, and we'll get to those when we get finished. So we had kind of a call to action. Getting a multidisciplinary team together from across the country is not easy at all. Hao Yi from the University of Florida, who is the current chair of the MLA Data Caucus, about 6 months ago, he sent out an email just kind of asking if anyone would be interested in collaborating to put something together for librarians, because all of us were kind of floundering, like, what are we going to do? You know, none of us were real well versed in the data part of it and the librarian part of it. So we wanted to kind of get together and help each other out. And he stated that in thinking about the upcoming NIH policy, I expected that there are other folks who might want to both share some of the burden and the benefit from multiple perspectives on what researchers would need. Having seen virtual collaborative efforts in the open science community before, I followed a similar playbook, which is to do enough coordination to make it easy for others to say yes and to contribute. And that's exactly what he did. There were more of 30 of us who answered yes to his call to action. Being from different disciplines and geographies, we came together virtually We talked about what our experiences are, what we felt would be most useful and necessary given our own work experiences, and what we thought would be useful to include in the toolkit. And then we divided into smaller groups, subgroups, depending on our expertise or sometimes what we wanted to learn more about. And that's how we came up with the work products that we're going to share with you. So just to give you an idea of the breadth and depth of our working group, this is everybody that kind of ended up at the end as contributors. We started off with many more than this, and we also had many more than this that were just like sitting in listening sessions, that kind of thing. We have a diverse group of people, librarians, data scientists, and everyone in between. So we really did kind of pool our resources and get together to make these products. So after a bit of deliberation, and we had separated into quite a few groups, and then we ended up merging some of those groups together, the working group produced these final products. And we're going to discuss these a little bit more in depth as we go on. So we have 3 glossaries, each of which is focused on grant terminology for different audiences. We came up with checklists for both researchers and librarians, as well as an extended reference guide for researchers. We have a collection of example DMSPs, which is arguably one of the most requested resources we get from our researchers. And then there's also a repository finder to help researchers with this very important step. So this is just a screenshot of the wiki page. We wanted to give you an idea of how the documents are ordered. When you go onto the OSF page and the wiki page, it has everything laid out for you, and you can simply click on it. You can view the product from there, or you can download it and use it as you wish, as you see fit. So with the glossary, the original idea behind the glossary was to give librarians specifically a crash course in grant speak so that they could better assist their researchers. As we started developing that document, we began to see that we needed one glossary for librarians and then another one for the researchers. In developing the data terms for researchers, we used the 6 required elements that were laid out in the NIH policy and the terms included within each one of those elements so that researchers could have a comprehensive understanding of what is expected of them. The grant speak and context glossary the grant speak in context and then the glossary for librarians are meant to assist librarians in navigating the terminology used in the grant writing process. And I mean, for me, speaking personally, that is a process that I'm not familiar with. So this was something that I was really excited about working on and also having at my disposal. So we wanted the documents to be easily accessible and usable so that librarians and researchers could access them without when they're giving either presentations or preparing for research interviews, or even provide them as handouts for teaching classes, which is why we have them in the downloadable format. For the checklist, we wanted to make sure it is user-friendly and as user-friendly as possible. So we envision this being used for all levels from novice to expert researchers. The checklist, like the glossaries, is organized using the 6 required elements outlined in the NIH policy. Each element is broken down into, each element is broken down and examples are given so that researchers can write a comprehensive DMSP that covers all aspects that are required by the NIH. And the extended guide dives deeper into those elements of the DMSP and gives you a really comprehensive view of what's expected of you and goes into a lot of that terminology as well. And now I'm going to hand it over to Lena, and she is going to discuss the other documents.
Okay, can go to the next slide. So the checklist for librarians is for use by librarians, of course, who will be assisting researchers with the new NIH data management and sharing policy. Librarians who will be working on this issue may be in a variety of roles, including data management, research and instruction, public service, reference, or solo librarian. So this checklist is intended to be broad enough to encompass anyone who finds themselves in need of guidance. There are 4 main checklists contained in the larger document: an environmental scan for the librarian to assess readiness at their institution, a list of potential partners to consider, possible data service areas for librarians, and a list of resources that librarians can use in reference to the other areas of the guide. These checklists are not meant to be taken as all or nothing, but rather utilized with your particular situation in mind. For instance, the list of possible data services provides a comprehensive range of suggestions that librarians can consider with a mind to their institution's unique needs and the staff and expertise they have available to call on. Next slide, please. The example DMSPS group created 2 outputs. The first was a website that cataloged existing data management plans available online. These were sourced from various online repositories, including the public plans available via DMP tool and collections from libraries. We created metadata for each plan, including assigning each a broad scholarly field and keywords. We attempted to focus on plans most directly comparable to the new NIH format, which meant we discarded some available examples. For instance, some online examples were over 10 pages long or in areas unrelated to science or social science, so we didn't include them. A majority of the available examples wound up being from grant applications to the NSF. Our second product was an annotated example plan. This plan takes a resource sharing plan, which was compliant with the NIH 2003 policy, and converts it to the new 2023 plan format with tips for writing each of the 6 sections. We left many details generic, but this is based off of a real grant proposal that a member of our group worked on, and we hope it will be realistic and directly applicable to your research. The tips were compiled by the primary author of the sample plan as she worked on it, so they should speak to many researchers' real experience when they first try to write the DMSP. In addition to our sample plan, other groups have put out 2023 NIH data management and sharing policy compliant plans. If you search the website catalog, these are listed with the note NIH 2023. So next slide, please. The repository finder will be a tool to help researchers choose an appropriate option for sharing their data. It is based off the website Cornell created for researchers to choose data storage options, which is what's in the screenshot. The Cornell website is open source and the code will be modified for this project. When researchers open the repository finder, they will have a series of survey questions they can answer in the left-hand menu, such as the size of the data set, if they need controlled access, and so on. Selecting answers to the questions will narrow down the list of repositories shown until researchers are left with a list of repositories according to their research needs. Then they will be able to do a detailed comparison of the remaining options based on the metadata collected in the tool. If you would like to test this workflow, you can try the Cornell site to visualize how it would work. And I'll paste that in the Cornell site. I'll paste the Cornell site URL in the chat, sorry. Because of the needed web development, this project has had a longer lead time than the other resources we created. Right now, it remains in development. The group anticipates that a version will be available through the National Center for Data Services soon, and then they will release a GitHub page with the needed code to host a customized version on your own library website. Thanks. Except for the repository finder, which, as I just mentioned, will have a release soon, all of these projects are available on our OSF project page. You can directly download the documents there and feel free to pass on the page to administrators and researchers in your institutions or librarians in your network who may be interested. We are hoping for as wide a distribution as possible. We have also used the OSF project wiki, as Danny said, to compile information about each group and the products we released, as well as a sample citation, similar in format to a README. One of our goals in creating these products was to create a sort of kit for librarians or researchers who need information about the new policy and materials to distribute to staff. We hope that these materials will be especially useful for librarians at small medical libraries, such as solo hospital librarians, by decreasing the amount that they need to create from scratch to provide library support to researchers. We invite you to download the materials and take what is useful or remix them as needed with attribution to our group. I personally have added many of the documents created by the group to our LibGuide at Astra for the NIH policy, and I've used them to create resource packets for the research support staff here. They would also be great to supply to researchers in a presentation on the policy as take-home handouts. So far, I've received positive feedback from our researchers, and I hope to hear from many of you that your patrons are also finding them useful. Next slide, please. So thanks for attending our presentation. We are going to open up the floor for a question and answer session. As a reminder, we do not represent the NIH, so we may not be able to answer all questions about the policy definitively, though we both have worked on a lot of issues surrounding the new policy in our libraries, and we can do our best to answer any questions. We hope you find the resources we in the working group have created helpful, and thanks again.
Okay. So I think that I don't see any questions in the chat or in the document yet. So if you have some questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. Lena or Danny, did you want to maybe talk a little bit about any kind of tracking of the use of this project, if the analytics or anything like that?
We do have a GitHub page set up. Lena, are you familiar with that one? I think you might.
I can put it in
more than I
yeah.
do.
Okay, because I have to admit, personally, I think I'm visiting the checklist on a almost daily basis, not quite, but I've downloaded it quite a few times because I always forget where I put it, but I've also shared it with a lot of people. I use it in my workshops, so I'm very grateful for that. And if people do use this content, you can let members of the group know. And I think that's also being tracked in terms of feedback and use and effectiveness of the content.
We do have a GitHub page that keeps track of how many times like new downloads have been done and things like that. So Lena just put that in the chat. Keeps track of some of our metrics, not as detailed as we're getting, but we're still also developing, you know, what do we want to track? We still trying to figure out what all we want to keep track of. But yeah, the GitHub page has started, so.
There's a question coming in, missed the beginning, and wants to know about different checklists are different than templates, but wondering how the content compares to the FDP templates that they are piloting. And then there's a second question that I can follow up once that is addressed.
So go ahead.
You can go ahead. Oh, okay. So we aren't related to the FDP group at all. So whatever they are doing, we have no special insight to that. We specifically didn't release a template, partially because there seemed to be a lot of people working on that, and partially because, you know, as is happening with FDP now, it seems like maybe the NIH would eventually come up with a template. So the checklist is meant more to be like, these are the pieces of information you would want to gather before writing your DMSP.
I can add a little bit more insight to that. My university is actually participating in the FDP pilot project. So I've seen the templates and they're very not similar, but they follow the same kind of pattern. So the FDP templates are, they kind of break down each one of the 6 elements. They go into what you need to cover. And that's what the checklists cover as well. So ours just gives you more of a, I've done this, like a checklist to-do list kind of format, whereas the FDP pilot templates are fillable templates that you're going to submit, and they're going to collect data on which ones researchers like, what they don't like, that kind of thing. We are not affiliated with FDP, so they are 2 different projects. but the content is very similar, as the content for both projects was pulled directly from the 6 elements that the NIH put forth that need to be covered in the DMSPs.
So, and as I understand, the FDP project overall is meant to reduce or streamline the grant submission process, right? So it's geared at all the paperwork involved in the process, where this project is really focused just on that 2-page data management plan. And I also believe that there's going to be that template is going to appear in the DMP tool at some point. And
They're having some technical issues getting that up and running, but they're working on it.
Yeah, so you'll be able to see that in the DMP tool as well. And the second question from that was, you said the repository finder will be released soon. Is there a target date to get that out, or any kind of, I guess, clarity on the timeline for it?
So the best I can say is, like, there is no target date. It exists at NYU. NYU's tech support was providing the main coding support for that. But it appears they've run into some snags with it. And I'm unsure at this point when they are thinking they'll be able to straighten it out and fix it.
Okay, so when they overcome the technical issues, then it'll be released.
Yeah, I mean, the goal was to have it released by now, but as I understand it, there are at least 3 or 4 issues they've run across.
And there is still the repository finder on that sharing.nih.gov. The one that they're developing out of Cornell and NYU was just supposed to be a little bit more plug and play friendly. So you still can direct researchers to the one that is at NIH. They've got all of them listed there. It's just not, it's not as user friendly, I guess, or as intuitive as the one that is in development right now. So for now, I would send researchers over to that repository finder at NIH, and then when we get the one up and running that they've been working on, then that'll be just an extra tool to add to the toolbox.
Mhm.
Any other questions?
Okay, there is one in the chat. Thank you for developing and sharing the resources. As the NIH policy has been implemented, I'm interested to know your experiences of working with NIH researchers. So does this, I maybe a little bit of clarity for this question. Is it researchers funded by NIH or researchers working at the NIH?
The question is from me. I'm curious about your experience of working with researchers who are preparing the NIH proposals, especially the data management plan under the new policy.
My experience, I've had a handful of researchers reach out to me, and it's been mostly questions about how do I answer element 6 specifically has come up a lot, because that's more of an institutional question versus a researcher question. So that's been coming out quite a bit. And then it really is they're really asking about where do I put, like, how do I find a data repository? What's the best, like, what are best practices for those kind of things? It's really just been basic questions that the NIH has covered in the sharing.nih.gov website. It's just not really easily accessible, and people would rather talk to someone and have their questions answered than digging around in a website. It hasn't been too extensive yet for me personally, but I know that we just finished like the first round of grant submissions before the policy came out. So yeah, it's still like a work in progress. We're still trying to figure out what the need is going to be.
If I can ask a follow-up question, I'm very curious about your answer about element 6, the institution oversight. We also receive questions like this. We'll be very curious to see other institutions practice.
Yeah, so I can kind of read off what we have. There it is. Okay. So in ours, in the one that was sent to us from our Office of Sponsored Programs Administration, we specifically mentioned that during the the process and submission and the RIPR progress or the progress reports, that the office led by the interim director, and then they list out the director. So in element 6, they want specific people, like who is going to oversee that you are following your data management plan. And in my institution's case, it is the Office of Sponsored Programs. So we had to list out those people and talk about when they would be analyzed, or sorry, when they would be reviewed, any kind of annual spot reviews that were going to happen. So that's who we had to list out. And I understand that in, different institutions, the hierarchy is going to be different, but we went with the grants office for my institution, and they're going to be ultimately responsible for making sure that those programs are followed.
So here, Northville is very decentralized, and this is considered an individual PI responsibility. So the biggest issue we have is them thinking there is going to be an institutional office that will manage this, or I have received a few data management plans, actually a few too, that list me as the overseeing person, and I don't want to be overseeing your grant. So I mean, I think going back to the question of support, Danny, I believe you've talked to me about, you've done a lot of presentations at like faculty meetings. I did one large presentation for our research institute, and then a smaller one on using DMP tool. And I've also, I'm pretty regularly getting data management plans to review, and various questions from researchers at the research institute here. But yeah, I mean, that's been the level of support we're providing.
And again, that support's going to differ depending on your institution, because Lena is a data management librarian essentially, and I'm a clinical librarian. So data management and what I do is like my side gig in the library. So it's not like my full-time position. So yeah, depending on, again, the institutional structure the structure at your institution, it's your level of support is going to vary.
Cool. If I might add to your answer a bit, it's if there isn't a specific data management compliance, then you might want to check into individual data types as well. Because I know a lot of large universities are revamping all their data governance plans. So my previous position was at University of Michigan, and they just really went through data types in detail to decide who the data stewards are, who the data managers are. And those data stewards are the ones who determine what you're allowed to do with that data type. So like some data types are a lot more flexible, and they're not going to police like every step of the life cycle. But for things like PHI, University of Michigan is really conservative about that. So they require approval at like all steps in the process.
So I think what's coming out of this is that each institution has certain levels of support. Some have more, some have gone to the level of declaring data stewards. And some are just leaving it to the individual researchers. And then the NIH would be the final part of that compliance, like with the, the unfortunate part being if an individual researcher is not compliant, they lose their ability to get funding. That's really the biggest stick that's there, right?
And I think that's why our office of our grants office kind of took it upon themselves to make sure that, obviously the PI is going to be held to some sort of accountability, but if they just left it to everybody individually, then there's no real way for them to govern that. And this way they kind of keep oversight and governance over all of it, which is helpful, but also a task to undertake. Not my task, thankfully, but yeah, it does need to be overseen. So
I will also say that in the several presentations that I've seen where NIH representatives have been available, they've all mentioned that this policy does increase the administrative burden on individual researchers across the board. That's something that they have really repeated and are aware of. Doesn't mean they're giving a lot more support, but it does mean that they're aware of it.
definitely.
Yeah. There's another question here about the repository used. It says if the researcher lists the repository they use and then the institution collects usage data from repository provided, can the institution use that stats as compliance report? I don't know if either of you are able to answer this question or if this may be like one that the NIH would actually need to address. So if you can, that's great. Otherwise, we can maybe bounce this to the NIH.
So I can say I don't know about like what you would have to do to put together a compliance report specifically. I can say that I have asked repositories because we're thinking about setting up an institutional repository using probably but outsourcing it, so it'd be an institutional instance of one of the generalist repositories like Figshare. And as part of that, we've asked some of the vendors we're considering to give us a list of people who are already using the platform. So you can get that those statistics. Will they give them to you if you're not actively considering buying their stuff? I don't know. Probably some of the more like the more nonprofit ones might, but it depends, I think. And if you're going to do that by searching, through the databases to find all the stuff your people have deposited, make sure that you're aware that people might not do it to standards you want. So with Northwell, our big problem is that people use different names. So instead of Northwell Health, they might use the name of their specific hospital. So it can be a bit of a data issue to find all the data sets that are related to your institution, depending on how complicated your institution is and how good your tracking is.
But I guess this is also where if you're able to put any PIDs into the data management plan, that would help with tracking as well. Your institution will have its own PIDs. The repositories will have PIDs, persistent identifiers, so you can put that, if that information is known beforehand, and can put it into the data management plan. And the DMP tool provides the space to be able to do that. So this is a way to create that linked data option for kind of tracking the output throughout the entire research life cycle.
The institutions I've seen that are really successful at it, the one I've seen that's most successful is Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. They just have a really strong culture of the faculty reporting everything like that. And the faculty report it and it goes into a research tracking system. So I think it would have to be more of like a culture and policy shift to get the researchers to report everything they're putting out on their own rather than us trying to track it down behind them. But that's just my personal opinion. Maybe someone has come up with a new strategy I don't know about.
See, there are a lot of people sharing great resources about, different repositories, how to find repositories. Again, I think the overall advice we might give is to try to put your data where your colleagues and other researchers in your discipline would be looking for it first, or in the repository required by the call. And if those aren't there, then you can use the other options such as generalist repositories or institutional repositories. Okay. So it says all data deposits get DOIs. Does NIH require DOI in the final report?
So not all repositories use DOIs, particularly the ones run by NIH might use accession numbers instead. For instance, GEO works like this. The important thing is that either you get the DOI or another, as Amy said, PIDs. So the accession number, and if is NIH going to require them in the final report? I think at this point is unclear to me. I don't know if someone else has insight, but I would, if you have that information, it would definitely be something to report because it will make tracking it down a lot easier for whoever's looking at your final report.
Okay. Let me just check the document. I don't see any additional questions.
I actually have another question about, one of the resources. I think is what about the usage of repositories in foreign countries? Some of the domains, like, different country like EU or Japan, they have their expertise and they've already developed their repository, and they welcome the data deposit from around the world. So what's the NIH's guidelines on that?
So the one I see a lot is the European Nucleotide Archive. I think in general, so the NIH list they provide isn't exhaustive. It's not like those are the only ones you can use. They want you to use they want you not to use like a fly-by-night repository if such things actually exist. But if there's one in Europe that everyone in your field is using, yeah, go ahead, use it. And then in your data management plan, write down, this is it creates a DOI or it creates an accession number. This is their metadata scheme that I'm going to comply with. This is their retention policy, so it'll be preserved for 5 years, 10 years, whatever. But yeah, I don't think there's anything in the NIH policy that would prohibit you from using a foreign repository that's established in your field.
No, nothing that I've seen either. And the NIH does have a list of desirable characteristics for data repositories. They want you to tick off all of those boxes. And it is things like unique persistent identifiers, that they have curation and quality assistance, long-term sustainability. They provide metadata, free and easy access, broad measured reuse. And then they've got other considerations when you're working with human subjects data. So, you know, your fidelity to consent, privacy, what happens in, you know, do they have a plan for data breaches, things like that. So they do have kind of a checklist to go through and make sure that your, whatever repository you choose, whether it's US based or Japan or EU or wherever, that it matches the quality of the repositories that are requested.
Okay, then what about, I mean, data, like depositing data in foreign repositories, are they considered a data export? What about that?
I don't know.
And again, we might be moving into territory that the NIH should be addressing these
Yeah.
questions. I mean, Danny and Lena are here to present about the OSF project to provide some of the guidance, but I do think that the NIH is like, you know, they're developing that FAQ page, which is, you know, the most up-to-date guidance, and you know, we're trying to keep up with them, who are, I think, also kind of changing things as they're going along, because this policy is quite it's a real shift in the way researchers, especially health and medical researchers, need to think about what they do with their research output. So we can provide an email that if we can't address the question, we could send, you can give you the email to send questions to the NIH. They're not that great about responding because I'm sure they're getting like 1,000 questions a day, but they may get back to you about it. So just to kind of.
Yeah, and if you're preparing an application and you have like the specific question, the other thing is also to reach out to your PO. Because these are the sort of like really granular questions, policy questions, Danny and I won't really know the answers to. And some of this like they might even wind up varying by institute.
So if there aren't any other questions, I can get that email and put it in the chat. But really want to thank Lena and Danny for presenting about the project. I also participated, and it was a really amazing experience to be with so many different knowledgeable librarians and information professionals. And thank you for representing the project so well, and for the time today. And thank you for everyone that asked questions. And again, if you have anything else, you can follow up with us and we can try to get you to the right place.
Thank you for having us.
Just gonna drop the FAQ page in there. Trying to find that email.
Isn't it sharing at nih.gov?
Yeah, here it is. So similar to the website, but again, Lena, Danny, thank you so much for that presentation. It was wonderful. If you have a place to link your slides, we can put that into the document. Are they in the OSF project?
No, because there's a couple of us that are doing different presentations, so we haven't put the slides in. Lena, if you're okay with that, I'd be happy to just email you the slides. Amy, if you wanted to have them, and
Yeah,
Yeah, that sounds fun.
okay, yeah, I'll drop you an email.
okay, thank you so much for that.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it was really good. Thank you.
All right, I will see you guys later. Bye.
Yep.
Wow. I think Venice has dropped off already, hasn't she? I was wondering if we could go directly to the planning meeting.
Works for me.
Okay. Sean, we'll see you over there. We can email Venice and see
Okay.
if she gets there. So.
Sounds good. See you in the other room.
Bye.